It was a cold morning in the deep forests of Alaska. The sun barely shone through the thick trees, and the air was so still that every little sound seemed louder. Alex Carter, a park ranger, was on his usual patrol. He loved these quiet mornings, surrounded by nothing but nature. But then, a strange sound stopped him in his tracks. It was a howl. Long, sad, and full of pain. Alex had never heard anything like it before. It wasn't a wolf marking its territory or calling its pack. This was different. It sounded like a cry for help. "What's going on?" Alex whispered to himself. His heart started to beat faster. He looked around but couldn't see anything through the thick forest. The sound came again, this time closer. It sent chills down his spine. Something deep inside him told him to follow it. Gripping his backpack tighter, Alex stepped off the trail and moved toward the sound. The forest grew darker as he walked deeper. Branches scratched his jacket, and the cold air stung his face. The smell of damp leaves and moss filled the air. The howl came again, pulling him closer. Finally, he saw a clearing up ahead. The ground was rocky and uneven, with cracks and crevices running through it. That's when he spotted her. A wolf. She stood near the edge of a deep crack in the ground, her gray and brown fur blending into the forest. But something was wrong. She wasn't growling or running away like most wild animals would. Instead, she was standing still, her head low and her golden eyes fixed on the ground below. She let out a soft whimper, almost like she was in pain. "Easy there," Alex said softly, stopping a few steps away. He didn't want to scare her. But the wolf wasn't looking at him. Her eyes stayed locked on the crevice below her. Curious, Alex carefully moved closer and looked down. At the bottom of the crevice, lying on the cold, hard ground, was a tiny fox cub. The little cub was barely moving. Its reddish fur was dirty, and it shivered with every weak breath. Alex's mouth went dry as he realized how helpless the cub was. It wouldn't survive much longer down there. Then he looked back at the wolf. She whimpered again, her ears twitching as she glanced between Alex and the cub. It was like she was asking him to help. Alex couldn't believe what he was seeing. Wolves and foxes were supposed to be enemies. Why was this wolf protecting a fox cub? This doesn't make any sense, Alex thought. But there wasn't time to think about it. He had to act fast. The cub's life depended on it. "I'll get them out," Alex whispered, as much to himself as to the wolf. The forest around him was silent, almost like it was holding its breath. Alex knew this wasn't going to be easy, but something inside him told him he had to try. Carefully, he leaned forward and peered deeper into the crevice. The drop was steep at least 15 feet, and the walls were jagged, with sharp edges of rock and loose dirt. It wouldn't be an easy climb, but it wasn't impossible. Alex took a deep breath and pulled off his backpack. He rummaged through it, pulling out a coil of sturdy rope and a pair of gloves. He glanced at the wolf again, who was still watching him closely. Her body was tense, her ears twitching at every sound, but she didn't move away. "You trust me, don't you?" Alex said softly, tying the rope securely around a nearby tree. "Well, let's hope I don't mess this up." With the rope anchored, Alex tugged it hard to make sure it would hold his weight. Satisfied, he slipped on his gloves and swung his legs over the edge. His boots scraped against the rocky wall as he slowly began to lower himself into the crevice. The wolf let out a soft whine, and Alex glanced up. She was pacing now, her golden eyes flicking between him and the cub below. "It's okay," Alex called out gently. "I'll get him." The descent was nerve-wracking. Rocks crumbled under his boots, and the rope creaked as it bore his weight. The air grew colder the deeper he went, and the earthy scent of damp soil filled his nose. His flashlight, clipped to his jacket, cast a faint glow on the walls around him. Finally, his feet touched the bottom. Alex crouched low, his flashlight sweeping over the ground until it landed on the tiny bundle of fur. The cub was even smaller up close. Its little body was curled up tightly, and its fur was matted with dirt. Its breaths were shallow, and its tiny paws twitched weakly. "Hey there, little guy," Alex said softly, kneeling beside it. He reached out carefully, his gloved hand brushing against the cub's fur. The tiny creature flinched at first, letting out a faint, pitiful squeak. "It's okay," Alex murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." He gently scooped the cub into his arms, wrapping it in his jacket to keep it warm. The little fox let out a weak whine but didn't resist. Alex felt his chest tighten as he cradled the fragile creature. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. But just as Alex began to prepare for the climb back up, a sound froze him in place. A low, guttural growl echoed through the crevice. It wasn't the wolf. This sound came from somewhere deeper in the shadows. Alex's flashlight flicked toward the source of the noise, his heart pounding. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the jagged walls of the crevice. But he couldn't see anything. Then the growl came again, louder this time, and Alex's blood ran cold. He tightened his grip on the cub and turned toward the rope. "Time to go," he muttered under his breath, his voice trembling. With the cub tucked securely in one arm, Alex grabbed the rope and began to climb. His gloves slipped slightly on the damp rope, and the cub let out a tiny whimper as he shifted his grip. "Hang in there," Alex whispered. "We're almost out." The growl came again, followed by a scraping sound, like claws against rock. Whatever was down there was moving, and it was getting closer. Alex's heart raced as he hauled himself up, his arms burning with the effort. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, he reached the edge and pulled himself and the cub out of the crevice, collapsing onto the ground. The wolf was waiting. She let out a sharp bark, her ears pinned back as she sniffed at the cub in Alex's arms. Alex sat up slowly, unwrapping the jacket just enough for her to see. The wolf leaned in, her nose gently touching the cub's fur. She let out a soft whine, her tail wagging slightly. For a brief moment, the forest was still. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in the crevice wasn't gone. "We need to move," he said, glancing at the wolf. She seemed to understand. With the cub safely in her jaws, she turned and padded into the forest. Alex followed, his nerves on edge, as they disappeared into the shadows. The forest felt eerily quiet as Alex followed the wolf through the trees. His boots crunched softly on the fallen leaves, and the faint sound of the wolf's paws padded ahead of him. The tiny fox cub was safe now, tucked securely in her jaws, but Alex couldn't shake the unease lingering in the back of his mind. The growl from the crevice still echoed in his memory. Whatever had been down there wasn't just any predator. It was something else. "Let's keep moving," Alex muttered to himself, adjusting his backpack. He kept his eyes on the wolf ahead, her gray and brown fur blending almost perfectly into the shadows. Despite everything that had happened, she seemed calm, focused, as if she knew exactly where she was going. After about 20 minutes, the wolf slowed down, her ears flicking back toward Alex. She glanced at him, her golden eyes calm but cautious, before stepping into a small clearing. The space was surrounded by towering trees, their branches creating a protective canopy overhead. It felt safe here. The wolf gently placed the cub down on a patch of soft moss. The tiny creature let out a faint whimper but stayed curled up, its breathing still shallow. Alex crouched down a few feet away, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is this your den?" The wolf didn't respond, of course, but she sat down near the cub, her gaze fixed on Alex. She didn't growl or show any signs of aggression. If anything, she looked tired, as if the events of the day had taken a toll on her, too. "I need to check on him," Alex said, gesturing toward the cub. "Is that okay?" The wolf didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on Alex as he slowly leaned forward. He reached into his backpack, pulling out a small bottle of water and a clean cloth. His hands shook slightly as he unscrewed the cap, pouring a little water onto the cloth. Carefully, Alex dabbed at the cub's face, wiping away the dirt and grime. The little fox stirred slightly, its tiny paws twitching, and Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him. "You're tough, aren't you?" he murmured with a small smile. The wolf let out a soft huff, her ears perking up slightly. Alex glanced at her and couldn't help but chuckle. "Yeah, I'm talking to him," he said. He pulled out a protein bar from his pack and broke off a small piece. Crushing it into tiny crumbs, he placed it near the cub's mouth. The little fox sniffed at the food before licking at it weakly. "There you go," Alex said softly, his voice filled with encouragement. "A little at a time. You're going to be okay." The wolf watched intently, her head tilting slightly. Alex couldn't help but marvel at her behavior. She wasn't just protective, she was aware. Intelligent in a way that felt almost human. Minutes passed, and the cub slowly began to show more signs of life. Its breathing steadied, and it even let out a tiny squeak as it stretched its legs. Alex leaned back, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "We did it," he said, glancing at the wolf. "He's going to be okay." The wolf's gaze softened. She stepped closer to the cub, gently nudging it with her nose. The little fox let out another faint squeak, and the wolf's tail wagged slightly. Alex felt a lump form in his throat. He had seen animals act out of instinct before, but this was different. There was something deeper happening here, something he couldn't fully explain. But the moment was interrupted by a sound that sent chills down Alex's spine. a distant growl. Low and menacing, it echoed through the trees like a warning. The wolf's ears perked up, and her body tensed. She stood protectively over the cub, her golden eyes scanning the shadows around them. Alex slowly rose to his feet, his hand instinctively resting on the tranquilizer gun at his side. "What now?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. The growl came again, closer this time. It was the same sound he had heard in the crevice, but now it was out here with them. The wolf let out a low growl of her own, her hackles rising. Alex's pulse quickened as he scanned the forest, his eyes darting between the shadows. Whatever was out there, it was coming for them. "We need to move," Alex said, his voice firm but quiet. "Now." The wolf seemed to understand. She gently picked up the cub in her jaws and began to back away, her eyes never leaving the tree line. Alex followed, his body tense as he gripped the tranquilizer gun tightly. Every step felt heavier than the last. The growls grew louder, closer, until Alex could almost feel the vibrations in the air. But the wolf led them forward, her movements swift and deliberate. She wasn't just running, she was leading them to safety. Finally, they broke through the trees and into another clearing. The growls faded, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Alex let out a shaky breath, his heart still racing. The wolf placed the cub down again and turned to face Alex. Her golden eyes met his, and for a moment there was silence. A connection. "You saved us," Alex said softly. "Thank you." The wolf huffed, her tail wagging once before she turned back to the cub. Alex knelt down beside them, his chest tight with a mixture of relief and awe. Whatever had just happened, he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the end of their story. The clearing was calm now, but Alex's nerves were on edge. His heart was still racing from the chase, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his pack. The wolf lay next to the cub, licking its fur gently, while Alex stood a few feet away, scanning the tree line. Something was still out there. The growls had stopped, but the forest was unnaturally quiet. No birds chirped. No leaves rustled. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. Alex took a slow step forward, his eyes darting to the shadows. His fingers hovered over the tranquilizer gun on his belt. He didn't want to use it unless he had to, but he also wasn't going to take any chances. Then he saw it. Two glowing eyes, low to the ground, staring at him from the darkness. They were wide-set and burned like embers, unblinking. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the air, making the hair on the back of Alex's neck stand up. His breath caught in his throat as the creature stepped into the light. It was massive, larger than any wolf or bear Alex had ever seen. Its dark fur was matted and uneven, its body scarred and twisted as if it had survived countless battles. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, and its teeth glinted in the faint light, sharp and yellowed. Alex froze. His pulse thundered in his ears as the creature snarled, its muscles tensing. It crouched low, ready to attack. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't a normal predator. It was something far worse. The wolf stood instantly, her body rigid and her golden eyes locked on the intruder. She stepped protectively in front of the cub, her fur bristling as she let out a fierce growl. It was a sound so powerful that it seemed to shake the air around them. "Get back," Alex whispered, more to himself than to the wolf. He reached for the tranquilizer gun, his fingers fumbling as he tried to steady his grip. The creature's eyes flicked toward him, and it let out a snarl so deep that Alex felt it in his chest. Before Alex could react, the creature lunged. The wolf leapt to meet it midair, her teeth bared and her claws slashing. The two animals collided with a deafening crash, their snarls and growls echoing through the clearing. Alex stumbled back, his heart pounding as he watched the brutal fight unfold. The creature was larger and stronger, but the wolf was faster and smarter. She dodged its attacks with precision, landing her own blows whenever she could. Blood stained the ground as they tore into each other, their cries of pain cutting through the silence. "Stop!" Alex shouted, his voice breaking. He knew it was useless, but he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. He raised the tranquilizer gun, aiming for the creature, but the chaos of the fight made it impossible to get a clear shot. The wolf let out a furious snarl, sinking her teeth into the creature's shoulder. It roared in pain, swiping at her with its massive claws. She was knocked to the ground, but she scrambled back to her feet, her determination unshaken. The fight raged on, and Alex felt helpless. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he couldn't leave the wolf and the cub behind. He clenched his fists, his eyes darting between the combatants, searching for an opening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the creature stumbled. It was bleeding heavily now, its movements slower and weaker. The wolf lunged again, her teeth flashing as she drove the creature back. With a final pained roar, it turned and fled into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. The clearing fell silent. Alex's knees gave out, and he sank to the ground, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The wolf stood still, her sides heaving with exhaustion. Her fur was matted with blood, but her golden eyes were calm, steady. She had won. You saved us," Alex said, his voice trembling. He couldn't find the words to express what he felt, but the wolf didn't need them. She let out a soft huff, her tail wagging slightly. She stepped closer to the cub, sniffing it gently to make sure it was okay. The tiny fox let out a weak whine, and the wolf licked its fur, her eyes softening. Alex felt a lump in his throat. This animal, this wild predator, had risked her life not just for her own survival, but for the cub and for him. He reached out cautiously, his hand hovering near her head. The wolf glanced at him, her golden eyes meeting his, before she leaned forward and nuzzled his hand briefly. It was a moment Alex knew he would never forget.